In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. Stories of resilience, love, and hope often emerge from the darkest chapters of history. And author Meg Hamand's Diamonds in Auschwitz is a stunning testament to that truth. A lifelong storyteller with a passion for history, Meg weaves an unforgettable narrative of survival in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Her novel follows Rachael, a Jewish woman imprisoned in Auschwitz, who finds a hidden diamond ring, a symbol of hope in a place where hope is all but lost. Intertwined with her story is that of Samuel and Hanna, a young couple in Nazi-occupied Prague, whose love is tested as their worlds fall apart. Meg Hamand, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
This was quite a story. How did it come to you?
Like a bolt of lightning, honestly. I had read a couple years ago Wendy Holden's Born Survivors, and it's a nonfiction book about women who went into Auschwitz pregnant. And yeah, it's an amazing book. There was a tiny little tidbit part about this ring. So this woman had held on to her family heirloom engagement ring. And as she was walking into Auschwitz, she was like, I am not going to let the Nazis have this. And so she dropped it in the mud before she went through the selection process. And it was just a sentence or two in this entire book, and it stuck with me. And I kept thinking, what if you were a prisoner in that camp and you found this ring? It's essentially worthless, right? You can't trade it for nearly the value. You can't eat it. But how would that change your life? How would finding something so beautiful maybe wake you up? And so it hit me all at once, that, and then how did it get there? And what did someone have to do to hold on to it and keep it from the Nazis all of this time? And so the two storylines that kind of intertwine themselves in the novel came to me all at once. I remember driving to work as this was coming to me, calling one of my friends and saying, I think I've got something. Does this sound like something to you? And she was like, you got to write it. And so that's how it came to me. And the details filled in as I did lots of research.
Why did you want to tell the story?
Oh, I have a heart for historical fiction. That's my favorite genre. I read everything, but that's really important to me. I think that there are so many amazing stories in different historical events, World War II especially. And so I felt really strongly that we needed to tell the story. And even though my characters are completely fiction, all of the scenarios that they're in, all of the places that they were, and even some of the side characters that they meet, that's all based in fact. And I think if we don't know that these things happened, if we start to gloss over them or water them down, we're really doing a disservice to those people that lived through it, survived it, or even worse, didn't survive through it.
How do you balance historical accuracy with storytelling?
Oh, that's a good one. I think historical fiction is the best because I can take what I like from it and make up the rest. So I really, in my author's note, I really work through what scenes are real, where's the research and the fact, and what did I make up? But everything, like I said, everything that happens to the characters, that happened. My one character, Rachael, she's got it rough. I feel real bad for her. I named her after my sister. So I'm sorry, Rachael, my sister. But I was very purposeful. And every terrible thing that happened to her was meant to show the progression of all the terrible things that happened to Jews in Prague at that time, starting with her oldest son and then her husband. And it was all meant to be very representative of how things just got progressively worse and worse for them. So I tried to really be true. Maybe it didn't all happen to one person. Rachael gets it pretty bad. But all of those things happened.
And the diamond ring is really the central character of the story. What is its significance to Rachael and the other characters?
I think it's the physical embodiment of things are going to go on. So one of the big themes throughout the book is if no one knows my name after this is over with, did I even exist? Rachael really struggles with, if people don't know I was here, was I ever even really here? And so that's how the ring is. That's the physical embodiment. It is here and it keeps getting passed on and it drives the point of view. So whoever's in possession of the ring is the story that we're seeing. And then on top of that, it's resistance. It's that little, what did it mean to the Nazis that someone was able to hold on to a ring up until the point they went into Auschwitz, or where they were able to hide it when they were in Auschwitz? It really did nothing, right? It didn't hurt them at all. But what did it do to the people that were able to fight back in that little tiny way? And if everybody could fight back against evil and what they know is wrong in just little ways like that, they're going to start to build up to be a full tide of resistance.
We're talking with Meg Hamand about her historical novel, Diamonds in Auschwitz. Her website is Meg, Hamand, author, meghamandauthor.com. Love, hope, and resilience are central themes to your story. Why was it important for you to highlight these aspects amid the horrors of Auschwitz?
Because it is so horrible. The story can get pretty dark because that's what happened. But I think at the end of the day, if we can find it in our lives to find beauty, to see art, to make connections with other people, there's always going to be hope for everybody. And that's what Rachael really starts to learn when that ring wakes her up in the very first page of the novel. I think she realizes that not all is lost. Not all is ever lost. There's always going to be something more that we can live for, fight for, a purpose to our life. We just have to find it. And in this case, it was like that ring is what woke her up and helped her find that.
My generation, I'm a child of the 60s, was taught about the Holocaust in school. What kind of research did you do to ensure the historical accuracy of your story?
Yeah. Like I said before, I read a lot of historical fiction and I read a lot of nonfiction as well. So I feel like a lot of the basics I knew. I started researching specifically the geography of people that went into Auschwitz. And that led me to Terezin. Now I'm going to use the Czech name because Terezin is German is not one of the languages I speak. So we're going to go with Terezin. That was the ghetto outside of Prague. And then I found out that it was mainly populated with artists, musicians, college professors, really artistic minds. And that was perfect because my story was already going to be about art and beauty. And then that took me to Prague. And just to think about Prague, and you're thinking of art and beauty and history and culture and like this melting pot of all these different things, it was so perfect. So a lot of my research really honed in on Prague and Terezin, and then the living conditions in Auschwitz. So I wanted to be very authentic to that. So before I ever wrote a description of a place, I'm looking it up. I'm re-looking at the books that I had read. And I think I discovered so many amazing things from this research. I thought I knew a lot about World War II history, about the Holocaust. But in Terezin, I talk about an art class that takes place. And my one character, Hanna, is an artist. So she comes in and she helps with this art class. And that 100% happened. There's actually a display of the artwork at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. You can see a little bit of their artwork. So I found the book of the artwork and the poetry that these children had put together, and it was really moving. And that is where I think historical fiction is so important, because I never knew that. And how many people didn't know that this had happened? And to the credit of all those children that went into Terezin and didn't come out, we need to know about these things.
What was the biggest challenge for you about writing about such a difficult period in history?
I was like actually making myself sick sometimes when I was writing some of the scenes. My first draft, I think I glossed over a lot of things. Oh yeah, this terrible thing happened. And I was going to say it happened off screen, remembering it. And as I was working with my publisher, Greenleaf, who has been fantastic, and the developmental editor, they're like, we can't gloss over some of these things. We got to see it. And so to have to sit down, and sometimes I'm like, I can't believe I'm writing this. This is so terrible. I'm so sorry, Rachael, because it's all the bad stuff seems to happen to Rachael. So I think sometimes I was appalling myself that I was even having to write this. But that just makes it hit home even more for me whenever I think about those scenes, and that, okay, these characters are fictional, but this happened to people. This happened to many people.
What did you do to recenter yourself after having to write such tough paragraphs and scenes?
I take my dog for a walk. Right? Like anybody would.
Yeah.
I would hang out with my daughter. There's a child in the novel, Haya, and she's really based off of my daughter, especially because I wrote this quite a few years ago. So my daughter is about the same age at that time. And a lot of the different aspects, especially the playful, curious, restless aspects that Haya has, those are coming directly from my daughter, unplugging and seeing the bright side of children again, instead of the poor kids that are living in Auschwitz.
We're in conversation with Meg Hamand. We're talking about her brand new book, Diamonds in Auschwitz. As this airs, it is available everywhere, wherever cool books are sold. Rachael and Samuel's journeys are so different, yet intertwined. How did you approach writing from those two perspectives?
Yeah, so I wrote them separate. I wrote the Hannah and Samuel storyline all at once. And then I laid that storyline out, and then I started outlining Rachael's storyline. And I tried to have it set up when something climactic was happening with Hannah and Samuel. I tried to have it pair up a little bit with Rachael and Haya. And then I, like a deck of cards, just folded them in. So my husband actually kept saying I was writing two books. I said, it's one book. I just wrote half of it, and then I wrote the other half. And he kept saying, I haven't read the second book. It's one book, I promise.
Why do you think it's important to continue telling Holocaust stories today?
Yeah. So think 50 or 100 years from now, if we aren't telling the story, or we are, again, watering it down, what's the risk that the generation 100 years from now looks at it and goes, past generations were a little bit tough on the bad guys of that time period. It doesn't seem like it was all that bad. And that's how we start to make the exact same mistakes going forward. So as brutal as some of the scenes are, as some of the true history of World War II is, it's hard to swallow. We don't like to hear it. It's very painful. We need to keep the honesty of that time period going so that we don't ever make that mistake again.
So how do you see historical fiction shaping modern conversations about resilience and humanity?
I think that it just makes it so much more relevant. I think we can look at times in history and start to see parallels. And never am I going to say that anything we're experiencing now is the same as the Holocaust, but there are parallels in all of these different things in history. I remember reading a book right as COVID was shutting down, and it was also about World War II. And I'm seeing like the importance of leadership and community from this book, which is talking about the London Blitzkrieg versus the pandemic. And there was a lot of parallels for me. And I think that can be said with all modern events and looking back at history.
You've been writing since you were a kid. That's what everybody tells me in their bios. How has your storytelling evolved as you've grown?
Yeah, so I started out wanting to do journalism, went to school, started out as a journalism major. Quickly was hit up by a creative writing professor and said, you don't want to do journalism, you want to do English, and you can do journalism if you want. So switched to English with creative writing minor. And I had in my head that I was going to keep that journalism aspect alive. And I had originally thought I wanted to do creative nonfiction like Truman Capote. We did a lot of college work on In Cold Blood. I love Eric Larson. I think he's an amazing writer. Then did the newspaper reporter thing for a while and then got out of it. I'm currently in a not writing artistic job. And nonfiction takes a lot of research. That is a lot of work. I don't think I have the work ethic for it. And I read so much historical fiction. You read and you write what you love. And so that's where I ended up. It's a nice melding for me between the two, right? I get to do the history. I'm really including the important stuff that people need to know about. But I also have this creative freedom to mess with the plots and the timelines and create these characters and make them in the image of my daughter or other people around me and really make that story my own. So it's, for me, the best of both worlds between my journalism background and wanting to be creative and free with the story.
We authors seem to learn something about ourselves by the time we finish each book we write. What did you learn from writing this book?
Yeah. So one of the things I think I most learned is, first off, I thought as I started, I was going to be more relatable to Hannah. I think I'm really definitely more Rachael. And one of the questions that I was trying to dive into with Rachael is, if you are a mother with no children anymore, are you still a mother? And I've got one child and she is adopted. So I feel like that's something that I struggled with before we were blessed with our child is I'm a mother in my mind, but I'm not a mother because I don't have any kids. And I think that's something that I learned about myself and how, seeing yourself as a mother without children. Yes. Can I be an artist if I don't create art anymore? Yes, you can. It's all about what's in your heart. And even though it's your passion, if you're not doing it, it doesn't mean you're not that person anymore. And I think that can be related in lots of aspects in life, right? I was a writer for all these years without a book. Yeah, I think maybe I was. But if you had asked me before writing this book, I would have said, no, you got to have a kid. You got to have a art. You got to have a book published. Otherwise, you can't identify yourself as those things.
One of the things that Viktor Frankl talks about is that ultimately we have the opportunity to define ourselves, no matter what our situation is. How would you define yourself today?
Oh, a debut novelist. I think still it's hard for me to say I'm a writer here because I know what my day job is. I am a lover of history. I'm a lover of telling stories. And I just so excited to continue down this journey and ready to get the second book published. So then I'll sit here in the next time and tell you, yeah, Terry, I'm definitely a writer.
What's the hardest thing about being a mom and a writer at the same time?
Not being depressed when you get done writing a terrible scene with kids in it and you've got to do some terrible, awful things because the Nazis are involved, in separating and shutting that part of me down. Because I think as a writer, I lived in the minds of my characters. I lived in that time period for the year and a half that I was writing this book, right? Every quiet time, I stop being Meg and I start being Rachael or Hanna, and I'm living through these scenes. And so being able to shut that down and then be present as an adult in 2025 and time management. I always joke, I said, if my daughter wasn't in musical theater and I didn't spend many hours at the theater, I would have never written this book because what else did I have to do?
The book is Diamonds in Auschwitz, and we're talking with its author, Meg Hamand. Do you have another book in you? What's next?
I do. I'm almost done writing book number 2. I will just tell you that it takes place in Charleston after the Revolutionary War. And it's a mixture of Charleston haunted legends and Shakespeare. Because why not?
That's definitely different than what you just finished.
A little bit. Yeah. I had to take a break from the Nazis.
What made you choose Charleston for the story?
We visited and did a haunted Charleston tour, which if you haven't done, I highly recommend. And all of the different legends were like, this is so cool. This is so cool. This is so cool. So I'm just going to mix a bunch of them together and throw in Shakespeare. That was what finally brought it all together in my mind. And see if it works out.
We all send advanced reader copies out to friends and others who are important to our careers. What's been the feedback about the book?
It has been overwhelmingly positive. It is so humbling to hear such positive reviews. One of them said that Diamonds in Auschwitz was a significant contribution to Holocaust literature, and that really made me tear up. That was an amazing compliment to be. There are so many wonderful books written about the Holocaust and World War II, and I don't put myself on that level with many of them. But to be considered important, to feel like I'm making a contribution in that memory, that's so touching for me.
A powerful story by an amazing debut author. I've read it. I highly recommend Diamonds in Auschwitz by Meg Hamand. Her website is Meg, Hamand, author, meghamandauthor.com. Meg, thanks for the conversation. This has been great.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been great talking with you.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.